Now, the UK, France and Algeria had called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said that the United States is watching to ensure that Israel's actions on the ground show that it does not have a policy of starvation in the northern Gaza Strip.
Colleagues, this weekend, like so many of you, like so many people around the world, I watched in horror as images from central Gaza poured across my screen. Images of what appeared to be displaced civilians burning alive following an Israeli airstrike. There are no words, simply no words to describe what we saw. Israel has a responsibility to do everything possible to avoid civilian casualties, even if Hamas was operating near the hospital in an attempt to use civilians as human shields. We've made this clear to Israel, just as we've made clear to the Israeli government at the highest levels that it must do more to address the intolerable and catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic. France condemns the Israeli strikes on civilian infrastructure, and we call upon Israel to guarantee the protection of all civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law. We express our alarm at the extremely grave nature of the situation in the north of Gaza. There, the Israeli army has, for several days now, been conducting an operation. The human toll is already very heavy. Almost 300 victims and 100 people have been wounded in a week, according to local authorities. The delivery of aid is hampered. New evacuation orders have been issued, despite the fact that any forced displacement would constitute a grave violation of international law. Israeli authorities must lift the obstacles hindering the delivery of aid.
Civilians are being targeted daily by those who seek our destruction. The Council has managed to convene just a single session on our hostages in 376 days, a small gesture considering the suffering and loss we continue to endure. And still, so many Council members barely mention the hostages as an afterthought.
Let's now talk to our correspondent who is in the United States. Susan Teherani is now joining us live from New York. Hi, Susan. We do understand that this time, unlike in the past, the United States has come out strong on Israel. What did United Nations representative for the U.S., Linda Thomas-Greenfield, actually say?
Well, she was very blunt in echoing what President Biden had said earlier, and that the United States is not afraid to withhold security and military aid to Israel should humanitarian access not be granted for UN agencies to go into Gaza because of the dire situation there. Before Linda Thomas-Greenfield, we heard from the acting undersecretary at the United Nations for the Secretary General on Humanitarian Affairs. She just recently visited the region, and she came back with some gruesome reporting on not only what's happening in Gaza, but in Lebanon as well. And considering the fact that, all policies are ultimately local, we have an election on November 5th. A lot of what the United States is doing right now is to save face for the Biden administration, where Kamala Harris is part of that administration at the helm as vice president. They are concerned that support is waning for the Democrats because of their policies when it comes to Israel and the Israel-Gaza war.
All right, we'll have to wait and see, because the United States has issued a 30-day ultimatum to Israel to allow in aid to Gaza. And we'll just have to leave it there. Let's see how that pans out. I've been talking to our correspondent, Susan Teherani, live in New York. Susan, thank you. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.